We're talking about a history of young people being able to do the most incredible thing as the people who are the most policed, the most subjugated, the most silenced in our society. Don't forget them and don't write them out of history.
Greetings. My name is Manuela Arciniegas, and I'm the Executive Director of Communities for Just Schools Fund, and this is our podcast, Beyond the Bell. Our podcast is committed to bringing you the voices, dreams, and brilliance of community organizers activating the public will for education justice. Together, we will learn about how to support building a world where youth, caregivers, and educators are holistically safe, thriving, cared for, and invested in. We know our communities deserve to feel dignified and safe irrespective of their race, economic status, zip code, gender, and ability. Unfortunately, today's public schools and communities are not yet safe places to learn, grow, and live for the majority of Black, Brown, Indigenous, trans, queer, two-spirit, disabled, or undocumented young people and their families. Yet, organizers around the country are working hard to build communities that are supportive and thriving. How do we get there? Today's conversation is filled with brilliant organizers from across the CJSF Partner Network doing the critical work around ensuring that young people are invested in and activating their leadership, bringing their families and voices to the front of the room. We will dive deep into their hopes, dreams, victories, and collective wisdom, because organizers can teach all of us about how to build worlds where everybody is safe and loved, not criminalized and punished. But what are the historical roots of the criminalization of our young people, particularly Black youth in urban centers like New York and Philadelphia? What does policing have to do with capitalism, institutionalized racism, and public education? On today's show, you're going to hear from Hiram Rivera and Zakiyah Ansari. A little bit about these awesome leaders who are calling for an end to privatization, to school closures, the repealing of policies that erode the civil rights and well-being of young people and their families. So first, Zakiyah Shaakir-Ansari is the mother of 8, the co-director of Alliance for Quality Education, or AQE. AQE is a coalition mobilizing communities across the state to keep New York true to its promise of ensuring a high-quality public education to all students. AQE is working to end the systemic racism and economic oppression in New York's public schools that continue to shortchange generations of Black, Brown, low-income, and immigrant students. Welcome, Zakiyah. How are you?
I am great. Good to be here. So glad.
So happy you're here with us. And our next guest is Hiram Rivera. Hiram is an Afro-Puerto Rican fierce leader. Originally from New Haven, Connecticut, he's a graffiti writer, father of 2, and currently resides in Philadelphia. Hiram is the co-founder of the George Jackson Organizing School and Black Men Build, and has over 20 years' experience as a popular educator. He's worked with campaigns to free political prisoners and in the Puerto Rican independence movement, the New African Liberation Struggle, and as an organizer in local education, juvenile justice, and criminal justice campaigns with CJSF partners like Urban Youth Collaborative and the Philadelphia Student Union. He also runs Community Resource Hub. Welcome, Hiram. How you doing today?
I'm doing good. I'm really excited to be here talking to you too.
And I know y'all know each other. And so later on, I'm going to ask you about how y'all started working together because I can't wait to hear that story. But first, I want to kind of turn to you, Zakiyah. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, how you came to this work as a parent organizer with Alliance for Quality Education, and why you do this work?
So, been doing this work for about 25 years. I'm not sure where the time went. I started when I only had 7 children. My son wasn't even born at the time. And like most parents do, as part of the Parent Teachers Association in the school, I didn't want to join, but one of the educators who had probably educated 3 of my children prior to me starting this work, I was like, you should join the PTA. And I was like, all right, I'll try it. At the time, to be honest, I was getting lost in just being a mother and a wife. And also, I had to start working because my paycheck was going to the paid childcare. And it wasn't even the childcare that's like they're learning their ABCs. It was a neighbor, right, who would do what she could and cared for them. I wouldn't worry about that, but it still wasn't what it was. So through that process of learning, joining the Parent Teachers Association, went just a moment, just in the right place at the right time of some collaboratives being started by then NYU. community involvement program. It was led by the late, great Norm Fruchter. And that's where I learned at the same time of being the PTA about organizing. It was a journey. It took a long time to get there. And what happened was, as I started to learn and unpack whatever the things I was feeling, the trauma that I experienced as a child, my aversion to confrontation. I am a rabbit. I run when I see confrontation happening. And so who knew 25 years later that even in those moments, I have to sit in spaces with generally white men who have influence and stay my ground and lean into that discomfort in ways that I never thought I could do ever. It wasn't just fighting for my own children. It was being an empath and knowing that my children's classmates and the families who had not found their voices yet, like I was carrying that too, whether they wanted me to or not. And it was vitally important. And as I was doing the work and seeing some of the progress and seeing some of the successes, it was a moment of, aha, my story does matter. As a Black Muslim woman in America, I'm a Gen Xer. I grew up at a time where, you were quiet, you didn't rock the boat. And so this journey of children getting involved, learning, organizing, at the same time I was being part of Parent Teachers Association, taught me that these systems were built to keep me in a box. And I was learning organizing was telling me just the opposite. Like these boxes, you knock down the walls. And at the time I didn't understand it, but it actually allowed me to be a better PTA president or parent inside the school, because I was challenging things and structures and regulations that I realized, because I was learning at the same time, literally were there to stop me from being as deep of an advocate as I could. And also at the end of the day, stopping our children from being as great as they could. So here I am 25 years later. In this moment, I believe all those years, all the things I experienced, this moment is calling for me to do something to bring all that to this space. I really feel that.
I love that, Zakiyah. And then just the image of you like grounding and harnessing all the people that come with you in a room when you advocate, when you organize for them. It's so beautiful to hear you talk about that, busting the boxes and stepping into your power. Hiram, what about you? Like, what's the origin story of Mr. Hiram Rivera? And why'd you start doing this good work of developing and training organizers?
It was an accident. It definitely wasn't planned. Grew up in New Haven, Connecticut. My parents didn't want my brother and I being Latin kings, and so they moved us out to the suburbs to go to school with the good schools, right? What they didn't expect was the incredible amount of racism and classism that we had to experience every single day for 4 years. Encounters with the police every weekend of all 4 years we were there, and the imprint that had on me. And one of the main things was in 1992, Malcolm X, the movie, came out. I was a sophomore and was just completely blown away. And I was like, that's what I want to do. I don't know how to fight back against these racist teachers, these racist students or whatever, but this is it. And it started me on a trajectory towards activism. And so went back home to New Haven for college, started getting involved in specifically Puerto Rican independence stuff, Black liberation, New African stuff, specifically around political prisoners. So working on political prisoner campaigns. And just started that work there. Didn't call it organizing, didn't know it to be organizing. It was just kind of like what had to be done.
Can you tell me a little bit real quick, Hiram? Like, why did the political prisoners movement call you?
It was their stories, the sacrifice that they were making. They were everyday, regular people like me who were willing to do whatever it took to free their people, and everyone, right? And free everybody. And that really spoke to me. So that level of like sacrifice and discipline and principle really spoke to me, especially when in school, the teachers and the students were looking at my brother and I like we were just degenerates, like we were drug dealers, like we were just bad, even though we never did it. I've never smoked or drank in my life, but I couldn't shake that because that was just the perception that these folks had of us. And so that level of discipline that they had, that sacrifice, that willingness to give everything for everybody was just something that really spoke to me. And I wanted to be that. So I got into it hoping that I would get tapped and become some sort of urban guerrilla or something. Now at 19 years old, 18 years old, I didn't know that part of the movement had passed, long past, right? But in my limited understanding, I was like, oh, this is what is required. This is what I can do. I can give my life to folks.
Oh my goodness.
I got placed in an organization in New Haven, Connecticut called Youth Rights Media, where I was training young people, high school students, on how to make video documentaries around the issues that they were facing. And then on top of the documentaries, we would run organizing campaigns around that specific issue. And that's when I was introduced formally to community organizing. I got pretty good at it. I moved to New York, got the job with the Urban Youth Collaborative through the Annenberg Institute of School Reform. And then I moved to Philadelphia and became the executive director of the Philadelphia Student Union. Learned a whole lot there, and then came on over to be the founding director of the Community Resource Hub, moving away from education justice and going back to specifically policing and criminal justice stuff. So throughout my youth organizing experience in New Haven, New York, and Philadelphia, education and criminal justice, juvenile justice were always intertwined, right? They were always happening at the same time. And so for me, it wasn't a great leap to move over into doing like policing, police abolition work, because it's something that we had been doing already since 2003 when I first started.
And so maybe we'll kick it to you, Zakiyah, and then I'll circle back with you, Hiram. What are the historical roots of inequality in public education? And how does this inequality impact young people and families in New York?
Oh my gosh, like where do you start? I mean, at the end of the day, one thing I tell folks all the time, like this work around educational justice is psychological, emotional, and physical abuse on the person even that's doing the organizing. Because it's basic level of you're just trying to get them to have what they need. You don't even ever get a chance to get to the transformational kind of education that they really deserve. And so it stems from having to prove that they're even worthy of having the things, right? Just Hiram's example of just being in a school that he had never done anything wrong, but because their personal experiences, because of all the things, they saw him and his brother as something that was just bad news, right? And we also know that when that happens to young people, and imagine a K-12 system throwing that weight on you over and over again, in addition to your potential living conditions and passing through police and or can't afford, so you're jumping a turnstile because you're just trying to get to school, but you can't afford that $2.90. And we were talking about this earlier this week. And then what happens is these students get these summonses that add up and you're not paying attention to them. Your mom doesn't know, grandma, whoever's taking care of you, you're not paying attention. It becomes a warrant. Then you're in school or you're riding on the sidewalk with your bike and some policeman stops you. And now they realize you have a warrant. You're like, a warrant for what? I've never done anything, because you're not thinking it's illegal to try to get to school. I just ain't got no money to pay for the thing, right? And so all those things kind of lead back to this nation's lack of foundation of understanding that we were ever even equal or deserving of anything other than working for, being below, having less than, right? And so can you imagine if that's the fabric and you're trying to push for the educational system, that takes more than just even just advocating for the dollars, right? Like that's a whole mind shift, right? And you're trying to do those things while also trying to alleviate and improve the conditions for Black, brown, poor, immigrant children and a school system. And part of what has been so important to make sure that happens is like to educate and bring along the adults too, along with the young people, to make those connections between adults and young people. And I remember having an example one time, I don't know if it was a UIC meeting, but I think I said something like, I don't know, kids, I must have said, I used some wrong word. And it wasn't disrespectful. It was just a check. And I was like, never again. When I tell you, I never forget that. So much so that if I hear somebody ever say that I say youth, young people, don't call them kids. And I don't even know if the young people who I'm talking about care, but because it hit me so deeply about how important language is, I never forgot it, right? And so those things and those connections and building those relationships are the things that get us, I believe, will get us to that liberatory space that we're trying to create for each other, that we're working towards creating for ourselves, for each other, right? And so when that happens and we know that systems don't believe our children are worthy to have smaller class sizes, to have working computers, to have educators that look like them and who are culturally responsive, to have enough money that they can travel and go on trips, because people think trips are like a luxury when we know that children learn from going on trips over and over again. That's what you try to do for your children, right? When they don't believe that they deserve affordable and free childcare, because that's where it starts, right? If our children, we know that when children get childcare, they come into the system, whatever the K-12 system is, knowing more words, reading, being able to interact with each other better, and often diagnosed in early care, right? Because now you know that maybe they have a speech impediment or they're autistic on the spectrum. Now they can come into the school prepared. And so we would be setting up the system itself to be successful, and ultimately higher education to be successful too. And I gotta be honest, like I didn't know when I started this work that that's how the system felt. And it was probably about 10 years ago, something happened. We were fighting for school funding in New York State. And I remember feeling so helpless, and it really hit me at that moment. I said, oh, these people really don't care about our kids. Like I heard it before, people don't care about us, da, 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 da. But I felt it. Like I felt it literally in my gut. And it took me a week to shake it off to the point where it's like, okay, this is it. So what you going to do? Right. And so it was hard, but it was a blessing at the same time. And so going back to systems and being in front of adults who can change circumstances for young people, and then having them act like elected officials and then act like they have no power. I have no tolerance for that. I have zero tolerance. And as someone who is very motherly, knowing I've had connections to young people for these last 25 years who are now adults and parents themselves, right? That's unacceptable. And so that allows me, in what I shared before of having low self-esteem and self-confidence and running from confrontation, that gives me so much strength and courage to stand in even the fear and discomfort of what was embodied for so many years as a child of, something's coming, you should run and you should leave. And it makes me stand 10 toes deep and understanding that me standing here and leaning into this person who can make change is not about me. It's not even just about my children. It's about all the stories that I've been privileged and honored to hear from young people, not only in New York State, but across this country.
I appreciate that, Zakiyah. And you're talking about like all kinds of accompaniment and witnessing and supporting people to stand, like you said, 10 toes down, to feel their own power and to return over and over again. And, earlier on, we were talking about what has made this so that the public school system for many of our kids feels like a reminder of being dehumanized every day. So just curious, what's the connection between all that and capitalism and the work of like supporting people to flower in the way that Zakiyah is describing, to flower into their full presence of their dignity and worth? How do you connect policing, education, and then the work of developing people to continue to insist on their inherent dignity?
It begins with what you said, right? It's white supremacy, it's capitalism. This country was created to make a certain segment of people rich. It is built on genocide of indigenous people, on the Holocaust and enslavement of African folks, and the continued subjugation of specifically Black people in this country, right? What they use to then subjugate everyone else and use that as a way to repress and keep everyone in their place. And so we see that through redlining. We see that in the way resources are not allocated. We see that in the way neighborhoods have been policed since the beginning of policing itself, right? And modern day policing is an invention that comes from, one, the colonization of the Philippines, of the Caribbean, and all those soldiers coming back to the U.S. and forming formalized police departments. And then it's also the combination of slave catchers. And so when you combine those two things together, is how you get the modern police who continue to do that today. And so this whole capitalist system that we live under exists primarily to make profit for a small segment of the population who then controls everything, who controls the culture, the religions, the books that we read, the magazines that we see, the movies that we watch, the music that we listen to. There's a constant indoctrination into a certain way of thinking that upholds this system that ultimately is subjugating us in the process. And so then it makes perfect sense that the schools will just replicate that in every way, from what they're teaching and specifically not teaching young people, from the way that they're structured, right? There's that old factory style bells and whistles and periods thing that comes out of that industrialization of the country post-Civil War. And then the policing that's in there, right? Where they're also made to feel like prisons for anyone who's gone, unfortunately, to like a public school in any of our major cities or most cities in the country. And so all of that is intentional because it serves a specific purpose. And so The through line is that every system, every institution in this country serves to uphold the capitalist system, serves to move the ideas, the beliefs, the self-interest of a rich ruling class elite that continues to rule today. And so a lot of the work that we do, specifically with young people, but with adults as well, is help folks understand that system, that your inability maybe to pass that regents exam isn't 100% your fault, because it's set up so that you don't fully get it. There's a small group of, I won't say a small group, there are definitely young people who are able to excel. There are definitely young people who are able to thrive in that system, so right, survive that system. But when you realize, when you look at it, a lot of those folks have learned how to basically move through a system, survive a system, navigate a system, but doesn't necessarily make them any smarter or any better than anyone else. We could not believe just how little Ivy League graduates and Ivy League folks actually knew if it wasn't written in some book from 1780, whatever. And so through youth organizing was to do that, shake that up. You may be here. Your school may not be the best. Your neighborhood may not be the best. You may not get the best grades. That doesn't mean that you don't know stuff. That doesn't mean that you don't have the capacity to reshape this entire world and this entire globe if we put the work in to do that. It's not magic, it's work, right? And so it's a lot of patience. It's a lot of unlearning. It's a lot of educating ourselves. It's a lot of growing as a staff. I started doing this when I was about 23 years old. 23-year-old youth organizer Hiram and 48-year-old organizer training Hiram are two completely very different people. There's a lot of similarities, but the stuff that was coming out of my mouth way back then, but there's a process. We're all learning together. And that was the beauty. That's the beauty of organizing. That's the beauty of youth organizing, is that you're learning together. You grow together.
I love that. It's like a deep respect for the human in front of you. This is a difficult, different, feels like a slightly different sort of time. We're seeing rising authoritarianism and fascism. How do you both analyze this political moment, the forces that our communities are up against? And how does your lessons and wisdom about why organizing works, how are you using that in this time?
I had this thought for so many years. So I say, what if? So for so many years, I've heard folks, and I didn't really understand what it meant. We need to blow this system up. All of it just needs to go. It needs to go. There's no room for it here. And we weren't always on the same page, so it didn't happen. What if? This is the universe's time to tell us it's not us blowing it up. Obviously, we might not have chosen the way it's getting blown up. But what if this is the moment for the system to get blown up, for us to rebuild or to transform it the way we want it to be transformed? Again, we would have done it differently, no doubt. But when you want something done, like the universe, God, spirit, however you want to define it, like, has the best plan. And so maybe this is the way it gets done. And so if that's part of what if, and you could think that way, then we should be planning on the building part. What is it we want it to be, that we have an opportunity now, because certain things don't exist anymore and we will need to recreate those things, right? What does safety look like? Because what they're doing right now is not safety. It is like criminalization on steroids. It's like anybody other than a white person is a good person, right? But it's also reverting back to the foundation that we just talked about. They're trying to get back there, whatever that thing is that they want so badly, which ultimately we know means for Black, brown, marginalized community, indigenous folks, whoever it is, it's more stealing of land, it's stealing of bodies, it's uneducated community. Why do Black and brown kids need education? It literally to the point of literally taking folks of color off TV again. Like all the shows, I don't know if you notice, that have Black and brown folks, Asian people, they're getting stripped from the television. Public television, like they're really trying to take us back. But what if this is the system? This is our moment. The folks who say, let's blow it up, our moment to come together and rebuild something that we want. I remember Mary Hooks sharing, when we start, I'm paraphrasing, but pretty much, if we're creating solutions and we're missing somebody, then it's not a complete solution. Right. So we're not all in the mix of figuring out what the next thing is, if it's education, then what it looks like in education, if it's housing, if it's whatever the thing is, then we're missing a part of the solution. That is not liberation, right? That means we still are incomplete. And I think we have a moment to do that. This moment, we know, actually, since the pandemic, has been calling for deep, deep, deep organizing, getting back to the roots of organizing. We were shut down for a while, and anybody who does organize, trying to hire organizers, we know it is a shortage of folks who really want to get back out there and really understand organize, which is why Hiram having this training and this work that he does is so vitally important, because there's no doubt in my mind when people hear this, that they're going to know Hiram is as brilliant as I've known for so many years. And that if you can get even close, if you can get an earshot of this brother right here, your life will be changed. And he's got people training you. Oh, let's go. Because that's the answer, right? The other piece is like around the organizing. Because to Hiram's point, it's the same thing with parent leaders. I think of that all the time. About, again, I was a parent leader who didn't think my story mattered, realized it mattered. And now we at AQ also provide a leadership development program called Education Warriors, where parents go to an 8 to 10 month leadership development program. And civics is part of that too, but they learn organizing 101. They learn the history of institutional structural racism, colorism we cover, understand the political landscape on the city and state level, and some other things that get mixed in there too. But to Hiram's point about young people, it's the same thing for parents. Like, there's so many times I heard folks like, why don't we have the money? Like, if they say, if we have the money, why don't we? I'm like, well, that's a deep issue. Like, start with racism, all the isms that exist. Those are the things that happen. Like, folks don't think it's that simple. But when you start showing who are the people, who makes the change, who could provide the change, they become, somebody's got to pay for this, right? It's the same kind of vein of who do we need to go to make the change? And because white supremacy, capitalism keeps it so amorphous, we don't even know, like, it's like, oh, it's these rich people, it's the dark thing. If we don't name the thing, we don't name the people, the systems, the legislators, or whomever it is that is doing this thing, then now folks don't know, they don't have anything to fight, and they wind up either turning on each other many times, or blaming somebody else that looks as marginalized in the community. Hence, folks taking, quote unquote, taking my jobs, or this, that, and the other. And we turn on each other, right? Which is the goal of the silos as well, is to have us turn inward on each other, start bickering and fighting, so they get to like pull rugs from under us, burn down our houses and all the things. Organizing has always been the answer. And also connecting, making sure young people, adults, educators, who really are in, for this life.
You're talking about harnessing all this awakening energy, Zakiyah. Like when you say blow it up, this is a chance where the federal Department of Education is literally pulverizing existing offices, funding, mandates, everything, right? And so we have an opportunity to rebuild it and design it in a way that will actually be transformative. Yet we know that organizing is taking a hit, especially by philanthropy, right? Never been funded at the level that it has to be funded or should be funded. And maybe some people say, hey, they never will because it's too transformative, right? And so just curious for both of you, what do you think is going to harness the energy that we need in the future to really get towards more liberatory education, more powerful communities, more organized communities?
I think for me, the thing that comes up, and again, it's because it's the nature of my work, it is the understanding for the need to get back to traditional relationship-focused organizing, community organizing, focused around relationships, building organizations. We organize for power. Power simply is the ability to make what you want happen, when and how you want it to happen. Organizers build organizations. Through organization is how you build power. Through organization is how you create the leadership development pipelines to take the directly impacted and move them into those leadership positions where they can speak and act right in their own self-interest. What we're seeing now after about 10, 15 years of a heavily funded movement, right, that kind of like focused primarily on identity, a lot of sloganeering and mobilizing, didn't build the institutions, the organizations, or the front necessary to push back against what we're facing now in terms of this wave of right-wing authoritarianism and the rise of fascism. We are in a moment in this country of a dying empire where the United States is trying to hold on desperately, right, to its position in an ever-changing world with the rise of different countries and different things happening all over, right? And it's doing everything it can to do that. And what it's doing, it's going back to how it started in the very beginning, killing and conquering everything and everybody. Because this system does not have the capacity nor the desire to meet the needs of all of its people, it is unleashing a wave of repression again and subjugation on folks that is causing two things to happen. Either some folks are falling in line and thinking if they go along with it, they can survive it, or folks are realizing, waking up to be like, wait a minute, this system actually never was for us. This system actually does not want to take care of me or help me out. And now they're looking for something else. This is where the organizing comes in. Because again, it's the political education to put into context what folks are experiencing, to open their eyes and connect the dots to what is happening internationally and the impacts it has domestically in this country, to then help them see why having an uneducated public is so necessary to this system and to these folks. Why it's important for them to destroy your public schools, destroy the Department of Education, roll back all of these victories that have been won through organizing to send us back into a position and a state where our ancestors already fought their way out of in order to try to hold on to this desperate and dying empire. And so through education, so many other victories across sectors have been won. And this is where folks are like, well, I'm out of school. What does that have to do with me? I don't have children. What does it have to do with me? It has always been through education where all these other victories have been able to be won. And so it's through the education system that they're trying to destroy what's left of these victories and what's left of whatever safety net used to exist for our people in this country. And so it's organizing that is most crucial in order to push back against that and to not only defend ourselves from these attacks, but ultimately fight and win for the complete and total transformation of this system, transformation of this country, and ultimately transformation of the world. Because now we're in a fight to the death, right? It's win it all or lose everything. And that's unfortunately where we're at. And that's where we have to understand and see it and start organizing in that way.
Yeah, and it reminds me of like the last chapter, how they have come literally for everything and everyone. Yale University was not absolved from an attack. Neither was Harvard. They are coming for everything. I was just thinking, we're recording this podcast in the end of summer 2025. And maybe last week they announced how they're going to offer student loan forgiveness for folks who sign up to become new ICE agents in a time when they're decimating like the federal student loan program. And so if you don't have history and knowledge, you're going to grab the carrot that looks like an opportunity for you. And it's the same incentives in terms of salary, benefits, retirement offered to folks to enter certain employment pathways that were more promoted in low-income, people of color, communities where you're either going to work in sanitation or you work as a police officer. Everything else was not going to be a living wage. And so people are having a hard time to figure out another pathway. What's the new path? Zakiyah, I'm just curious for you, like, I wanted you to talk a little bit about what it took to have some of these really powerful transformative victories that AQE has been a part of, just to document this really powerful story. And then what else it's going to take in the season that we're in and what's coming. What's going to be the secret sauce, the superpower that's going to help us get to these other worlds that Hiram is describing that only organizing can take us through.
Yeah, so the Alliance for Quality Education, the organization that I'm co-ED of, it is a victory for sure, but I think it's an example of what we're talking about, which is, that we were created around an equity lawsuit called the Campaign for Fiscal Equity, which pretty much was a lawsuit brought from parents in Washington Heights to the state saying that they were not meeting their constitutional obligation to provide a sound basic education for every child. That was filed. That started in 1993. So after 13 years back and forth in the court in 2006, because of the organizing of everybody across the state, we were able to get the state to commit to a 4-year commitment of those dollars. And I think it's important. The reason I'm sharing is because it's a little bit of context. It's supposed to be a 4-year commitment. First 2 years, system was flooded with $1 billion+, began to see improvements. Then the market crashed. And AQE spent the last 14 years or so reminding the state that it had not met its constitutional obligation and or actually hadn't funded it since 2008. So because of 2020, what was happening then? A pandemic, the racial reckoning of killing after the killing of George Floyd, and our governor's power getting weakened. If one of those things were not happening, we would still be here fighting for the campaign for fiscal equity dollars. But because they were, and because there's not one person who could deny that what we were saying, and parents have been testifying and young people have been talking about for all those years, that schools didn't have hand sanitizer or nurses, the HVAC system wasn't working, and like all these things. Everybody was talking about education because what? We were in a pandemic and it was a priority for everyone. So here we are, all these things happening. And in that year, we finally got the state to commit to phasing in the final dollars of the campaign for fiscal equity. And in 2023, they finally were phased in. 30 years, y'all, do the math. 30 years, 3-0. All my kids had graduated out of school. I don't have grandkids in school by now. How many generations had lost the opportunity to have the things they needed, those dollars, so they could be greater and better and not have struggled? And to Hiram's point, yes. Did many do well? Yes. Did some of them thrive? Absolutely. But again, why is it always that we have to be in deep struggle when it comes to our communities? It doesn't have to be that way. Again, something I learned. It doesn't have to be that way. It is intentionally that way. So I say all that it was a historic victory. We couldn't have done it without organizing with parents, young people, educators, community members all across the state. So much so that I remember organizing with them young people who are now adults. Some of them are actually even elected officials now, right? And so we could not have done it without those folks. We couldn't have done it without being in coalition with organizations. That's another form of organizing, but it can be a struggle. But coalitions help over the years for not just that, but also it's to say that even we transformed in those years of fighting because we really got deep into the school to prison pipeline work, really got deep on childcare, really got deep on culturally responsive and sustaining education in pre-K. Why? Because we saw the continuum and we knew if we did all those things right, guess what? Children were going to be successful. So it's always with young people at the center of them being well, being healthy. And that's why we've always chimed in on what's happening around the globe too. Because if children are being harmed, whether it's Gaza, Congo, Sudan, Haiti, or any place else, everybody should be saying something about that, right? And so we stand 10 toes deep on that for the last 25 years. It's not just about making sure the kids here, it's children in general. It should all be stepping up. And I think my vision and the secret sauce is that we can't get to liberation without healing too. And sometimes we've missed that. We miss moments of rest because the urgency of the moment is always there. We don't know anything else. It's just the churning. I've just finished watching Ryan Coogler's Katrina series. Oh my gosh, like it's just churning. Like every time you turn around, there's something there that could have been changed and shifted for Black, Brown, Indigenous, marginalized communities, and it's not done. And so again, bringing us back to one, healing is really important. And I think that could be as small as taking a nap on a daily basis so you can regenerate. And it could be as big as like taking vacations and taking time off. And it could be as big as watching the thing, whether it's Ratchet that you like, it's just secret pleasure that you watch, Love Island or whatever these shows are.
My Korean soap opera, Zakiyah.
There you go. Novella, whatever, telenovela, whatever the thing is that you like exercising that muscle, that trauma muscle we know so well. We know it intimately. We can recite it back and forth. The healing, the joy one, not so much, right? And so those moments of penciling in joy was my hashtag for this year, because how else do you do the other thing? How else do you do more than this? And that's why, when George Floyd was murdered in the streets and people were doing the electric slide, and or what's happening in Gaza, you see them doing their traditional dances, or the chants in Sudan or Congo, like that does something to it. That is a healing space that allows us to do the thing. And we can't stop doing that. And that's definitely part of the secret sauce, because the urgency of the moment is always going to be there. But we collectively have seen too many people do this work who have died from heart attacks and gotten sick, right? And can no longer do the work. And I think part of what has gotten us there is that as folks of color, we never get a chance to rest. As women of color, we never get to rest. We're always caring for somebody else. And it took me too long. It took me a long time to learn that rest is part of the resistance, right? And so the secret sauce is all those things. It's listening to each other. I feel like this is our Fred Hampton moment too, right? I keep thinking that too. Like Fred Hampton was very clear that everybody who was feeling some pain, that we could organize those folks. And that's why he was doing it. And that's why they took him out, right? This is that moment too of organizing the folks who get it and are feeling the pain. Does it mean we're going to kumbaya? It's never about kumbaya, right? It's always about like the power. So to Harry's point, how do we build power? And is that a way to build power too, right? The folks who we may not see each other, but our struggles are starting to align, or they're starting to see that their struggles align with ours. And how do we build power in that way?
Thank you, Zakiyah. And Hiram, any last thoughts? I kept thinking about the payback that you said and imagining Zakiyah's sons and daughters getting the funding that they were each due, the per student investment from way back when they were in school that never came or took 30 years to come. That was rightfully their resource and investment, right, as students in schools.
The last thing I want to say is organizing has always been the way that our people have been able to free ourselves from slavery, free ourselves from colonization, free ourselves from any form of oppression. Has always been through organizing, right? Organizing and fighting back. One thing that we have to understand too is that we also have to start thinking about envisioning and practicing organizing beyond philanthropy. Philanthropy has the opportunity and has the ability to catapult movements, and we saw that in 2014. They don't create them, but they're able to dump a lot of funding in and catapult them and launch them into the direction that they want to. And then, just like we're seeing now, they're able to pull all that money away and completely bottom out everything. And then dump money back in and catapult and then bottom out everything. And catapult and we stay in that yo-yo. And what we're realizing is that the more we stay in that yo-yo, the worse and worse things continue to get. We don't get any closer to liberation. And so what we need to do is start organizing, thinking about how do we make use of these nonprofit structures that we have? How do we make use of the resources that are made available to us now, but to start building beyond philanthropy and start envisioning our campaigns and our work outside of philanthropy, because then that's when we start really getting into that sauce that you're talking about. And that's why it's a secret, because we haven't done it in so long, right? We've been so captured in this moment. We have to start building beyond philanthropy, right? To then really get to that point where then we can start making people pay, where we can start winning back what's rightfully ours, and we can start building the communities, the organizations, the world that we deserve. We cannot forget history. And I'm not talking about Black Panthers. I'm talking about recent history, because we're going back to CJSF and we're talking about the young people. Abolition, since Black Lives Matter and Movement for Black Lives moment has really put on the table, and everyone is so much easier to identify as an abolitionist now than it did decades ago, right? And there's a lot of work that went into doing that. But that also does not happen without young people. 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds who unfortunately have been written out of that history. And it's a personal thing for me that bothers me, right? Because I had done youth organizing for so long and had been involved in these movements for so long. Youth organizing starts in the Bay because of gang injunctions in the 90s with teenagers. In 2004, by 2005, high school students in New Haven, Connecticut were able to get the governor of Connecticut to agree to shut down that youth prison in Connecticut. In 2008 is when the young people in New York City are unearthing all this information that there are more cops in their schools than there are on the streets of Washington, D.C. And that something has to be done about the over-policing because the impacts that it has on their education. The school-to-prison pipeline becomes a thing that everyone starts to understand and starts to know. We were talking about it in 2000. By 2008, they started to understand what was happening, not just in New York City schools, but all over, 14, 15, 16-year-olds. In 2014, the young people at the Labor Community Strategy Center in Los Angeles got the LAUSD to end their partnership with the police, and specifically that 1033 program, and got the LAPD to return all the military weapons and get the military weapons out of their school district. The first in the country to ever do that. When we see those tanks in Ferguson, we see the tanks at Standing Rock. Those were high school students, 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old, right, who were able to get that out of their system. Power U in Miami, right, did it in Miami. We're talking about young people who, for the majority of them, were never tracked to go to college. But it was those young people who won incredible victories and were the first ones to start envisioning what a world without police could look like. They didn't call it abolition. And sometimes it was like, what does schools without police look like? And then that would turn into like their neighborhoods if you were in those meetings with us, right? To where we get the idea in 2012, Journey for Justice, to have community schools. What would schools look like if they had wraparound services and weren't just for young people, but were also for their parents and everybody else in the neighborhood, in the community? What impact would that have against gentrification? Over policing, those were young people. And so those are two main points that I want to leave in terms of secret sauce. We have to build beyond philanthropy, because staying in philanthropy is what's going to keep us in this mess. And then two, don't forget the real young people. Young people got changed after 2014 and the BLM moment to be a 25, 26-year-old college graduate, right? And we forgot about the 14, 15, 16, 13-year-olds who had been doing this work for almost 20 years before that. When the Dream Defenders in 2012 took over the Capitol in Tallahassee, that launched the organization, that big moment, right? What is not discussed is there were about 100 young people who came through the Alliance for Education and Justice from all over the country on buses. Again, 13, 14, 15-year-olds who also occupied that Capitol in the name of the struggle. So let's not forget the power that young people. Chairman Fred was 21 years old when he got killed. Bobby and Huey were like 19 and 18. We're talking about a history of young people being able to do the most incredible thing as the people who are the most policed, the most subjugated, the most silenced in our society. Don't forget them and don't write them out of history.
Thank you, Hiram and Zakiyah, for bringing your wisdom and grounding us in the legacy and power of young people, of organizing. This is a long road, and we just want to thank everybody out there listening. That was Zakiyah Shaakir-Ansari, co-executive director of Alliance for Quality Education in New York, and Hiram Rivera, founding director of Community Resource Hub, the George Jackson Organizing School, and Black Men Build. Since the recording of our podcast this summer, the mayoral administration of Zoran Mamdani has invited Zakiyah, along with other CJSF movement partner leaders like Casey Foster from Partners for Dignity and Rights, and Natalia Aristizabal from Make the Road New York, to join his mayoral transition committees in the areas of education, public safety, and immigration, respectively. Their appointments reveal the hard-earned expertise they have gained as organizers, making them powerful shapers of the future public policy for public education in New York. In this episode, Hiram and Zakiyah remind us of three powerful lessons. The first is that the work of developing youth and caregiver leaders is transformational and sacred. When parents and young people who've never been treated like they are worthy engage in a process that unlocks their own brilliance and power, that takes time and is deeply transformative as they realize their own potential to change their communities. Second, Hiram and Zakiyah also helped us understand history and how we got here, how the enduring legacy of racism and inequality has been entrenched in public schools and public safety systems. Whether through defunding, divestment, over-policing, and the denial of basic needs like housing, food, and education, our youth and their families continue to suffer the imbalance of power baked into our political system. More importantly, through organizing, youth and caregiver leaders learn that someone is ultimately benefiting from this injustice. Naturally, their sense of unfairness they experience inspires them to channel their rage and craft solutions to address this violence, which is repeated over and over again onto our youth and our communities. Third, both Hiram and Zakiyah remind us that relational organizing training is still needed and essential because it is organizing that transforms our material conditions. They both shared their stories about their own accidental becoming as organizers, made possible because other organizers helped them see their own talent and power. Through the George Jackson Organizing School Hiram leads, or the Education Warriors Parent Training Academy that Zakiyah runs, Hiram and Zakiyah remind us that the road ahead will continue to be paved by the slow and steady work of developing leaders and building base, and then supporting organizations and formations to lead the transformations they envision. Through their experience in the Black Freedom Movement or the Puerto Rican Liberation Movement, Hiram and Zakiyah remind us that the strongest organizing across history happened at a time before organizers were paid and when organizations didn't depend on philanthropic funding. These organizations operated autonomously and had more self-determination. How do we support current organizing groups to achieve this level of economic and political autonomy from philanthropy? We want to thank Hiram and Zakiyah for sharing with us the power of their own decades-long relationship as organizers, comrades, and friends. They showed us what strong intergenerational bonds and solidarity looks like across people and across organizations, and how necessary these trust-filled bonds are in the work of long-term movement building. As Zakiyah and Hiram invite us to stand 10 toes down in our fight for education justice and for youth across the globe, they inspire us to anchor in a deep love that all young people and their families deserve, because their time is now. Our podcast was brought to you by our amazing producer, Phil Serkis, and the CJSF community, comprised of 65 plus national grassroots organizing groups and our 20 plus foundation donor members. Please subscribe, like, and share.